Have you ever noticed how a job can quietly steal your peace without anyone else even realizing it? Yet you're the one who ends up feeling guilty for wanting that peace back? It's almost taboo to admit it out loud, especially when everyone keeps saying things like, just be grateful you have a job, even while you're drowning in burnout at work, wrestling with workplace anxiety, and whispering silent prayers just to make it through another shift. It's wild how the moment someone admits they're overwhelmed at work, especially in fields like healthcare burnout or ministry fatigue, people act like faith should magically erase spiritual burnout. But faith doesn't cancel humanity, and God never asked anyone to pretend they're invincible. Here's the counterintuitive truth most people won't say out loud. Sometimes the guilt you feel isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign you've been carrying more than God ever asked you to carry. And the emotional exhaustion, the mental fatigue, the shift exhaustion, the losing peace at work, none of that means you lack faith. If anything, it means your faith is being stretched in ways only God truly sees. So if you've been juggling stress at work solutions, trying to find purpose at work, holding on to Christian encouragement while feeling guilty for wanting rest, you're in the right place. Because today isn't about pretending. Today is about reclaiming what's been quietly slipping out of your hands. And I'll tell you right now, there is a way back. A way to stop feeling guilty, a way to breathe again, a way to feel God's presence in hard times even when your job feels like it's draining your soul, a way to pray for stress and actually feel God's peace settle in your chest like a weight finally lifted. So stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand what tired but trusting God really looks like, and why this season might be the doorway to a faith you've never experienced before. Recognizing when your job is stealing your peace. He often doesn't realize when losing peace at work begins. It usually starts quietly, like a soft leak in the soul. One day he's fine, and the next he's sitting in the parking lot negotiating with himself just to walk through the door. It's that moment when workplace anxiety becomes the norm, not the exception, and emotional exhaustion feels like part of the job description. He tells himself, everyone's tired, but deep inside he senses something sacred slipping. And that's where the guilt creeps in, especially for someone trying to keep faith during stress. He might notice he's snapping at people he loves, praying for stress relief but barely having the strength to whisper the words. Healthcare professionals especially know this feeling. Shift exhaustion that leaves no room for God's presence in hard times because the mind feels cluttered, overrun, spiritually burnt out. A simple example. He wakes up on his day off and still feels drained, unable to enjoy rest because guilt and faith are at war inside him. That's not laziness, that's spiritual burnout disguised as responsibility. And here's the part nobody teaches. When mental fatigue keeps showing up louder than motivation, it's a sign the soul is waving a flag, asking for Christian encouragement and maybe even a new rhythm. He may try stress at work solutions, reading scriptures, journaling, or listening to Christian mental health podcasts, but something still feels off because the root issue hasn't been named. Naming it is the beginning, the doorway, and once he recognizes this shift, well, that's where something deeper starts to unfold in the next part. The hidden guilt behind wanting rest. He often carries a guilt he can't quite explain, especially when he starts wanting rest more than productivity. It feels almost wrong to admit he's overwhelmed at work, as though God expects him to power through every storm without pausing. He looks at others who seem to handle the same workload and wonders why he feels spiritual burnout while they appear unaffected. But guilt is sneaky. It whispers, "You should be stronger," even when God himself isn't saying that. This inner conflict becomes a quiet battle between faith and emotional exhaustion. That guilt grows stronger when he starts imagining changes, like taking a break, asking for help, or even considering new boundaries. He fears people will think he's ungrateful, weak, or not trusting God enough. But the truth is, tired but trusting God is still trust. A practical example. He says yes to covering extra shifts even when shift exhaustion is breaking him, because saying no feels sinful. He forgets that Jesus rested, and that dealing with guilt is part of Christian mental health, not a rebellion against faith. And somewhere between his prayers for stress relief and the pressure to keep going, he begins confusing busyness with purpose. He wants to find purpose at work, but the guilt clouds his vision. That's when God and anxiety feel like they're colliding instead of coexisting. Yet this internal tension can become a turning point, a place where God starts whispering clarity. And it's in that whisper that something surprising starts to rise. Something will open up in the next topic. How God meets you in the middle of your work anxiety. He often expects God to show up only when everything calms down, but God tends to walk right into the chaos, into the burnout at work, the workplace anxiety, the moments when mental fatigue feels heavier than his own thoughts. He thinks he has to fix himself before God can restore him, but that's not how God works. God's presence in hard times isn't earned, it's given. Even when he's losing peace at work, God slips into the cracks of his day like a quiet anchor holding him steady. A simple example, he's in his car before a shift, hands shaking, whispering a prayer for stress he barely believes will help. But somewhere in that defeated whisper, God deposits a strength he can't explain. Not energy, strength. There's a difference. Strength to walk in, strength to breathe, strength to endure. That's Christian encouragement in real time. Not fireworks, but oxygen. And step by step, he learns faith during stress doesn't look heroic. It often looks like small, shaky obedience. And slowly, he realizes something counterintuitive. Spiritual encouragement doesn't always arrive as instant relief. Sometimes it arrives as clarity, or a thought that says, "You don't have to carry all this alone." And that thought becomes a spark, one that invites him into a new way of navigating work, stress at work solutions, and even finding purpose at work. And just when he thinks this is only about survival, the next layer begins to reveal a deeper truth. Understanding that your calling doesn't require self-destruction. He's been conditioned to believe that being called means being constantly exhausted, especially if he works in caregiving fields or ministry. Somewhere along the way, he absorbed the lie that healthcare burnout or spiritual burnout is just part of being chosen. But God never asked anyone to sacrifice their mental health on the altar of responsibility. Emotional exhaustion isn't a badge of honor, and mental fatigue isn't proof of faithfulness. He begins realizing that God's peace and God's purpose are not enemies, they're teammates. A practical example, he volunteers for every task because he equates busyness with obedience. But real obedience sometimes looks like saying, "I have to rest," even when others don't understand. He might try blocking out 1 hour a day just for silence. No phone, no work emails, no noise. It feels strange at first, but he starts sensing God's presence in hard times in ways he never noticed before. That stillness becomes a kind of spiritual encouragement that reminds him he's human, not a machine. He slowly learns that faith in hard seasons doesn't mean pushing himself to the edge. It means trusting God enough to stop performing. He sees that tired but trusting God is still faith, maybe even stronger faith than pretending everything's fine. And once this truth sinks in, something begins to shift internally. His soul starts asking a new question, one that will lead him straight into the insight we open up in the next topic. By now, he realizes something powerful. He was never meant to survive his days. He was meant to live them with purpose, clarity, and God's peace steadying his steps. The burnout at work, the losing peace at work, the emotional exhaustion, none of it defines him. What defines him is the God who walks with him, even when he feels overwhelmed at work or tangled in guilt and faith. And the moment he chooses to apply what he's learned, even in small, imperfect steps, everything begins to shift. So let me ask you, what's the first thing you are going to change? Will you finally set a boundary? Will you allow yourself to rest without apologizing for it? Will you whisper a prayer for stress relief instead of carrying the whole world alone? Or will you keep letting guilt tell you a story that God never wrote for you? Be honest with yourself. Something in you already knows the answer. And that answer might just be the doorway to becoming tired but trusting God in a whole new way. If this message spoke to you, even a little, don't let it end here. There's more for you to learn, more encouragement to receive, more spiritual strength waiting for you. So subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because you don't want to miss what comes next. And trust me, what's ahead is going to strengthen your faith in ways you've never imagined.